Video, we're going to introduce the idea of what is topicality. So the things that we're going to cover are kind of about what is topicality and how does it sort of function. The first thing we have to acknowledge is that there's a resolution. Hopefully your coaches have talked to you about what the specific resolution for your year of debate is going to be forthcoming, and that topic, that resolution, is supposed to serve as the foundation for what you are going to discuss throughout the year. So, the first thing you have to acknowledge about that resolution, however, is that the words that are inside of the resolution do not have a static meaning that they don't have necessarily one set-in-stone definition for how you should interpret each word. Even United States federal government is interpreted and defined in multiple different ways, including the one that thinks of it as the government in Washington, D.C. Sometimes you find definitions that argue that the United States federal government is a conglomeration of all of the independent states, the 50 states that exist. And more common than that is you can find definitions that argue that the United States federal government is made up of the people. It is for the people, we the people. And so even just that word in and of itself kind of proves that there's no real static definitions for what words mean. And so topicality is really about guiding the scholarship for the year based upon that resolution by coming to an agreement or arguing that a specific interpretation of the words inside of the resolution are the ones that should be used. And what topicality does is, with those definitions that you are forwarding, it will establish what is inside and what is outside the topic, therefore dictating what exactly should be learned about. One last thing to note about topicality: it is only the affirmative's responsibility to be topical. The negative does not have to be topical in any stretch of the imagination. Now, it'd be good if the negative were to talk about the plan, talk about the 1AC, even talk about the topic, but only the affirmative has to be topical. So, now that we've kind of introduced the idea of what is topicality, we're going to look at the structure of topicality. There are 4 parts to any sort of topicality argument that you would hear. There's the definition or definitions that would occur. There's a violation, standards, and a voting issue. And we'll go through each one of those one by one. First is the definitions. What specific words out of the resolution are you looking to define? You need to think about what makes your definition better than any other definition. Is it a common person? And common person definition should be the basis for how we go about researching a resolution. Is it a legal definition? Why are legal definitions better? Is it contextualized to the topic area? And why should that contextualization and experts dictate what the topic should be for that resolution? And one last thing to look for inside of definitions, and could be an argument as to why it's better, is there an intent to define? Oftentimes, you will find pieces of evidence that define a piece that might give exemplars or examples about a particular meaning of a word, but it won't necessarily have the intent to define what that word is. And so you might be able to make some arguments as to why certain pieces of evidence having an intent to define makes it a better piece of evidence than one that maybe doesn't. And then you should have exclusive and inclusive definitions. What I mean by exclusive and inclusive is that you should have definitions that exclude the AF and say that the AF is outside of the resolution. And then you should also have evidence that indicates what the plan that you are saying is not topical, what it is. So maybe be like, it's not a climate policy, but it is a something else. It is a geoengineering project, which is not quite the same necessarily. And so you want to find inside of the literature exclusive and inclusive definitions so that you can not only say that the affirmative is not inside of the resolution, but that and then be able to articulate what it actually is. This goes a long way in order to assure judges that you're not just making things up. The second part of topicality is a violation. And here you were just explaining why the affirmative doesn't fit within your definitions. And so there might be several different definitions that you use, and you want to be able to explain why the affirmative in the 1AC doesn't fit inside of those boundaries. If you want to think about it this way, it helps a lot of people. You want to think about the violation as sort of a link argument. What is it about the affirmative that falls outside of the resolution? And explain that as a link argument. And that helps a lot of people sort of articulate T arguments a little bit better. And then the last thing you want to think about when you have your violation is that your interpretation or violation should be able to solve your standards for what you are arguing is the impact to not being topical, which is what we'll talk about now. The standards. These are really just internal link or impact arguments to the interpretation that you forwarded not being followed in debate, or good reasons why you might want to follow the definitions that you forwarded in this topicality debate. Generally, they will be things like education, in order to have in-depth debates, and get really into the literature base, you have to have a predictable standards or ideas of what the resolution is actually talking about the topic being. And so the only way to learn about things is to be able to have that sort of clash that exists, and so there has to be some sort of agreement. Ground makes the argument that you just didn't have anything in your box or anything that you were able to read against the affirmative because they were not bound by and did not exist within the resolution. And so because you didn't have anything to say, debate became really unfair for you. Predictability. Is the affirmative typical of the resolution? Is it predictable? Are you able to articulate where in the topic literature that this affirmative exists? With your T argument, you're arguing that it is not predictable. And then fairness is the ability for the affirmative and the negative team to be able to win pretty even based upon the literature base, or is the affirmative team trying to get an advantage somehow and make the debate unfair so that they always win? All standards, regardless of what they are going to impact out to either education, and education about the topic is important because whatever reason. It could be like, if it's a climate change topic, maybe it's we need to learn about climate change in order to be good activists, to be able to actually pursue Congress getting climate change legislation passed. Or is it a fairness argument? Is it about making the debate as fair as possible because things like scholarships, GTA positions, and prestige are on the line, and so we need debates in order to be fair? The last part is just a voting issue, and this is really just you saying that T is a voter because otherwise teams would earn unbeatable truths, and that would make debate really, really hard in order to be able to win. So, what you want to think about when you're going to argue about your topic is what makes that topic utopian, and what would it look like? What kind of research would be done, and what kind of topic education would be done, and why is that good for the upcoming year's resolution, etc. So that's the type of stuff you want to think about when you're constructing a topicality shell that you would use throughout the year.